It is a truth universally acknowledged that a major disaster in possession of a large body count must be in want of a movie adaptation. So the assorted number of movies based on the world's worst maritime disaster ever to occur during a time of peace should come as no shock or surprise to modern audiences. But what about the days when film was in its infancy, and how has that attitude changed as the industry evolved? How have the developments in the technology and storytelling of film and television impacted how we view events and their portrayal on screen? Join me in taking a look at the various ways in which the Titanic disaster has been applied to film and television in the 100 plus years since the ship hit an iceberg on that fateful April night in 1912 and took 1,517 souls with her to a high-pressure, watery grave. But before we get started, I must inform you that, unfortunately, I won't be able to show any clips from the film featured in this video. But for once, it's not because of YouTube's restrictive copyright rules. Though given that this film is over 110 years old and way out of copyright, that still probably wouldn't stop YouTube from trying. Sadly, this film shares the same fate as many of its contemporaries and is considered lost, although destroyed might be a better descriptor. Let this be a lesson to back up all your work as often and in as many places as possible. That destruction is an historical blow of titanic proportions, as not only does this film have the distinction of being the first ever dramatization of the tragedy, it is also highly sought after due to its lead star having been aboard the doomed ocean liner and escaped with her mother on lifeboat number 7. Let's dive into the history of the silent era film Saved from the Titanic and its star, Dorothy Gibson. Dorothy Winifred Brown was born on May 17, 1889 in Hoboken, New Jersey. When she was 3 years old, her father, John A. Brown, died, leaving Dorothy in the care of her mother, Pauline. In 1894, when Dorothy was 5, her mother remarried to a man named John Leonard Gibson. Dorothy adored her new father, and the three quickly settled into family life. In 1906, at age 17, Dorothy started her acting career on the stage as a member of various chorus lines under the stage name Polly Stanley, which she had adopted in an attempt to protect the reputation of her stepfather, who was a successful merchant and devout Christian. You see, once upon a time, working on the stage, as it were, was seen as barely being one step above a street bangtail. For a modern equivalency, see the level of respect and acceptance strippers, pole dancers, and adult film stars currently receive from mainstream society. It was during one of these stage performances that Dorothy came to the attention of famous commercial artist Harrison Fisher. Harrison went backstage to introduce himself to her, telling her he admired her face and asked if she would sit for him as a model. She accepted and was quickly earning anywhere from $15, around $489 US today, to $50, about $1,630 US today, per sitting. Dorothy was featured on postcards, posters, ads, and book illustrations, as well as being on the covers of magazines including Cosmopolitan, Ladies' Home Journal, and the Saturday Evening Post. In 1909, Dorothy met a young pharmacist named George Henry Battier Jr., whom she married on the 10th of February 1910. But by the time summer of the same year rolled around, the bloom had quite faded from the rose of their marriage, and the union quickly disintegrated. The couple officially separated, and Dorothy moved back in with her mother and stepfather. Her film career started in 1911 when Dorothy joined the Independent Moving Pictures Company, where she worked as an extra and stock player. She became a leading lady in July when she jumped ship from IMP and signed to the US branch of the Paris-based Eclair Studios. Dorothy was an instant hit with audiences, becoming one of the first actresses in this new medium of film to be promoted as a star in her own right. She was praised for having a natural, subtle acting style and was particularly effective as a comedienne. In October of 1911, Dorothy attended a motion picture distributing and sales company ball held at New York's Alhambra Hall, where the 22-year-old star met the 41-year-old Pierre-Ernest Jules Brulatour, who had made a name for himself in the industry by destroying Edison's monopoly through creating the Independent Motion Picture Company with his partner Carl Laemmle. The two would later go on to found Universal Studios. Dorothy and Brulatour were instantly attracted to each other, and due to Brulatour's being married and having 3 children, they quickly embarked upon a clandestine affair. She called him Julie, and his affectionate name for her was Musty. From late 1911 to early 1912, Dorothy was featured in a total of 24 films. To give some context here as to how somebody could complete so many films in such a short time, most of the films being created around this time were what became known as one-reelers, meaning they used only one reel, which was about 1,000 foot, of actual physical film stock. These films would run anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes and had a turnaround time from filming to release of about 2 months, making it possible for such a large amount of films to be made over a short period of time. As Dorothy's appeal rose, she was given the lead in a number of films, including The Musician's Daughter, Love Finds a Way, Miss Masquerader, The Awakening, The Kodak Contest, Easter Bonnet, and The Lucky Hold-Up. But even for one-reelers, 24 films is a lot in such a short time, and after an exhaustive several months of back-to-back filming, Dorothy needed a break. She pleaded with her bosses, and especially her boss partner Brulatour, who had begun to produce films at Eclair, for a holiday. She had been earning $175 per day, which is about $5,350 in today's money. And what good was all that cash if she couldn't spend it on a bit of fun? She even went so far as to threaten to quit if she were not given some time off to relax. They caved in to her demands, and on March 17, 1912, Dorothy and her mother went on vacation to Europe. Their itinerary included the various capital cities in the countries on the continent, as well as Algiers and Egypt. But when they arrived in Genoa, Italy on the 8th of April, their hotel received a telegram for Dorothy from Eclair Studios asking her and her mother to return to America. Apparently, an emergency had arisen, and directors Etienne Ornald and Maurice Tournier needed her to return immediately to America and begin work on a new series of films. Luckily, the 3 weeks she'd been away had fully restored her spirits, so she cabled her reply, telling the studio that after a brief stop in Paris, she would take ship in Cherbourg on April 10, having secured passage for herself and her mother to travel, first class, on the White Star Line's newest and most modern ocean liner, the RMS Titanic. After boarding in Cherbourg, Dorothy and her mother met and rubbed shoulders with the likes of J.J. Astor and his second wife, 18-year-old Madeleine Talmadge Force, Molly Brown, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore and Ida Strauss, Lady Duff Gordon, Lady Countess Roths, Titanic designer Thomas Andrews, and they likely also met Captain Edward Smith. She met and befriended a man named William Sloper, who would later sit beside her in a lifeboat, adrift on the dark ocean as they listened to the panicked screams of those without a chance of survival. During her time aboard the Titanic, Dorothy sent and received several telegrams from her paramour back in New York. It seems her absence from his daily life had made his heart grow fonder, as he sent 2 separate messages, one saying, "Will do everything to make you completely happy. Love you madly, Julie," and the other declaring, "It caused no happiness without Musty. Never allow you leave again, Julie." Isn't it nice to be missed? Dorothy must have thought so, given her reply, "Hardly wait get back. Cable made me awfully happy. Musty." But as we are all well aware, such fun and games came to an abrupt end at 11:40 p.m. on the 14th of April when the ship hit an iceberg and began to sink. Dorothy's account of the night of the sinking has been preserved within the pages of the April 27, 1912 edition of the Motion Picture News. "I was seated on one of the upper decks with several others playing bridge whist. The steward had come to us time after time telling us that it was past time for lights to go out. We had begged insistently to be allowed to play just one more rubber. At 20 minutes of 12 we left the card table, and I was just at the foot of one of the magnificent staircases on my way to my stateroom when I heard that peculiar crunching sound which proved later to be the iceberg ripping open the side of the ship. My companion and I merely noted the occurrence in a passing manner, supposing that perhaps a propeller had broken or something of that sort, for we knew that there were icebergs around us. In fact, it was impossible not to know, for they were all about. And so we continued on our way, the gentleman who was with me suggesting a certain course around the deck which would bring me closest to my stateroom. As we turned to come toward the stern of the ship, we found ourselves, to our great surprise, walking uphill. We both remarked that it did not look right to us, and felt that something must be wrong. Inside we found the steward, who assured us that nothing was the matter. "Why," said he in most confident tones, "you couldn't sink this ship if you wanted to, and supposing you could, she couldn't sink under 10 hours anyway." Leaning over the deck rail, I exclaimed that there was water on the deck below, at which he assured me that the bulkheads had all been shut off, and that it was not anything serious. Just at that moment the designer came rushing up the stairs, his face perfectly livid. Not until this moment was I certain that there was really anything serious the matter. I stood in front of him as he came along and asked him what the trouble was, but he pushed me aside and tried to continue on his way. I stepped again in front of him, asking the same question, still without receiving any reply. His face was enough, however, to make me feel real concern, and so I went immediately below and brought my mother to the deck where we were. She put on her coat suit, and we each took a steamer rug with us. I had only a sweater on over my evening dress. When I went to my stateroom, I had light satin slippers on, and when I came up, I had on these black pumps that you see on me now, but I do not know when or how I got them on. I had a pair of gloves, and Mother had none. The passengers, becoming alarmed, came one by one from their staterooms, and I shall never forget when, as we stood there with only 3 lights burning in the immense room where we were, there came to us the cry of "All passengers to the life preservers." Everyone went quietly without a sign of panic and did what they were told. Mr. Bruce Ismay fastened the life preserver on me. My mother was the first woman in the second boat launched, and I followed. There were only 26 in our boat. The reason of this was that most of the people up to this time felt safer on the big boat than down on the open sea in a small one. After our boat had been let down, we found that the plug had not been put in, and then when it was put in, it did not fit, and someone had to sit on it all the time to keep it down. We looked about for a lantern, but there was none. Then we hunted for matches, and not a soul could find any. I happened to put my hand in my sweater pocket and found that, by some means of which I have no knowledge, a box of matches had been placed there. I may have picked them off the card table. We had neither water nor food. One man, supposed to be a French baron, gathered all the blankets to himself. This same man, when aboard the Carpathia, appropriated no less than 45 blankets to make himself a soft bed. We were about a mile from the Titanic when she sank, but I will never forget the terrible cry that rang out from people who were thrown in the sea and others who were afraid for their loved ones. No one knows just how anxiously we watched for some sign of a boat. Repeatedly, some eager passenger of a lifeboat would shout that there was a ship approaching, and we would all spring up to find that the light he had seen was only the twinkling of a distant star. At 4 o'clock in the morning, when we had ceased to take notice of the calls that the ship was near, the Carpathia really came. She could not come to us, however. We had to row around the icebergs to get to her. I was so tired that I slept 26 hours after getting on board the Carpathia. Everyone was so perfectly splendid to us. The women aboard all came and offered us their berths and clothes, and in fact anything that they had of which we could make use. Although lifeboat number 7 had been the first to leave the Titanic, it was the third boat to reach the rescuing ship, the Carpathia. As Dorothy stood on the Carpathia's deck, watching as other survivors were discovered and taken up from their lifeboats, and still clad in her damp evening gown, she was approached by Carpathia passengers James Russell Lowell and his wife, who asked if she would like to share their cabin. Dorothy gratefully accepted. She had her breakfast, and as stated in her interview, she slept for over a full day. Upon waking, she tried to send a wire to Brulator, but discovered that there was a backlog of messages from fellow survivors also wanting to contact their loved ones, and so she had to wait. She finally received a message from him 2 days later on the 17th of April. "Will be worried to death till I hear from you. What awful agony. Julie." The next day, she borrowed some money to cable her reply to be delivered to his home on East 27th Street. Knowing Brulator's wife may see the message, she ensured her reply was generic and banal. "Safe, picked up by Carpathia. Don't worry, Dorothy." As the Carpathia sailed into port on Thursday, April 18th, which by all reports 'twas a dark and stormy night, The ship became surrounded by smaller boats, all filled with reporters, cameramen, and photographers, shouting questions to those aboard the Carpathia, offering massive sums of money for the survivors' stories. Carpathia's captain, Arthur Rostrom, boldly and loudly declared that he would shoot any pressman who dared to venture aboard his ship. When the Carpathia docked, thousands of people crowded around, trying to catch a glimpse of the survivors. As Dorothy and her mother finally disembarked, her stepfather was standing at the end of the ramp on the dock, anxiously awaiting their arrival. Dorothy spotted him and ran to him, crying and holding out her arms. He swept her up, holding her close, and they were soon joined by her mother, the three holding tight to each other. Pauline's sister was also there, along with a number of their friends and neighbors from Hoboken. Leonard Gibson ushered Dorothy and her mother through the crowd into a taxi and whisked them off to a celebratory party at a New York restaurant. After reuniting with her father, Dorothy anxiously desired the opportunity to meet with Jules Brulatour, for it would have been grossly inappropriate for Brulatour to have met her at the pier, and so she suffered through a few hours of regaling her friends and family with the tale of her harrowing adventure before she was able to excuse herself. Exhausted but determined, she took a taxi to her Manhattan apartment, quickly changed, and jumped into her car, which had been a gift from Brulatour. She drove through the stormy New York night to the hotel where she had arranged to meet him. Brulatour greeted her with an engagement ring worth $1,000, that's $30,500 in today's money, and a proposition to make a one-reel film based on her experience. Truly a man sensitive to her trauma and PTSD. Dorothy agreed, and within 2 days the pair had set to work to make the first ever film based on the sinking of the Titanic. While the film was going to be centered around Dorothy's experience, it seemed no one could resist the filmmakers' need to never let the truth get in the way of a good story, and so a plot was sketched out which couched her experience within an overarching romance. Why they felt this necessary to add is a mystery to me. I guess they thought featuring the first recreation of the sinking in a film starring an actual survivor wasn't enough of an incentive to draw an audience. Typical Hollywood, always unnecessarily complicating stories. A detailed explanation of the plot was printed in the Motion Picture News and reads as follows. Miss Dorothy, who on her return home is to be betrothed to Ensign Jack, U.S. Navy, has written to her parents that she'll embark on the Titanic from Cherbourg. They and Dorothy's girlfriends are impatiently awaiting her return. She had promised in the letter to send a wireless Sunday night so that they could know the time of her arrival. Jack, naturally, is impatient to have news of his dear one. His friend, Ensign Williams, who has a friend Bill Jenkins in charge of a wireless post, proposes to take him there so that he can communicate with the ship direct or learn if any news comes from her. While they are telling Jenkins the object of their visit, he receives a CQD from the Titanic telling of the disaster. No pen can depict the anguish of the young man and the scene the ensuing day when he calls upon Dorothy's father and mother. But the Americans aboard the ill-fated ship did their duty, lived up to their motto, always women and children saved first. No doubt they were put into the lifeboats. Some lives must have been saved, why not Dorothy? True, Dorothy was among the saved. Later on, we find the oblivious sweethearts at table with Dorothy's mother and father. She is requested to tell the story of the shipwreck to Jack. She does so vividly that one can almost imagine that the catastrophe is being enacted there, more especially as a vivid vision of the fatal collision is portrayed by the camera. But the strain of recalling the distressful event is too much for Dorothy, and she faints as she finishes the story. The next day, so impressed was her mother at seeing this, she calls on Jack and explains that if he wishes to become her son-in-law, he must resign from the Navy, as his calling on the sea is too full of perils, and she fears that Dorothy, whose emotions have been stirred by her terrible experiences, could not stand the strain of her constant anxiety on his account. Jack hesitates. She gives him all the night to think it over. He tells his captain and friend of his dilemma, his conflict between love and duty. The bluff old commander argues in favor of the service, clinching the argument by telling him that the first consideration of a naval officer is due to his country's flag, at the same time pointing to Old Glory floating in the breeze. Jack understands and decides in favor of the service. When Dorothy's father calls for Jack's answer, he replies, "A sailor's first duty is to his flag and country." The father, impressed and happy to find such lofty and patriotic sentiments in the young man, declares that he could expect no other reply from an officer of the U.S. Navy. The father shows his own true loyalty as a citizen and calls Dorothy in, saying, "My daughter, there's your husband." He gives her hand over to Jack, who is overcome with surprise. There's a weird subtext of American exceptionalism and patriotism in that synopsis, especially as regarding the Navy. Not only is Jack wanting to join the Navy, but the rescue of survivors by the commercial steamer the Carpathia is replaced with rescue coming in the form of a naval vessel. Adding in Dorothy's father praising his potential son-in-law for wanting to pursue a naval career despite Dorothy's experience, with the final shot of the film reported to be of the lovers embracing, intercut with a close-up of a proudly billowing American flag. Did I say weird? I meant standard. Here's proof American films have been propagandizing to audiences since the early days of film.
America, fuck yeah! Coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah!
I'm sure no other countries which make a Titanic movie will include any such propagandizing subtext.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
The cast was quickly gathered, Dorothy Gibson playing Miss Dorothy, with Julia Stewart as her mother and Alex B. Francis as her father. Her on-screen fiancé Ensign Jack was portrayed by John D. Adolphi, with his pals played by William R. Dunn and Guy Oliver, and featuring Isabelle Lemon and Muriel Ostrich as Miss Dorothy's friends. They set up shop at Eclair's Fort Lee Studios in New Jersey and rented a derelict freighter that lay in New York Harbor as their Titanic stand-in. A model of the Titanic was built along with a mini iceberg, and the film even featured footage of icebergs from the area in which the Titanic sank, alongside footage of Captain Smith as he inspected the deck of Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. Dorothy even appeared on screen in the same outfit she'd been wearing the night she left the ship, a white silk evening dress, a sweater, overcoat, and black pumps. During the filming of the scene where she related her experience to her on-screen friends and family, Dorothy became so overwrought she fainted, and that shot was apparently included in the final film. The freighter was docked right by the area where Dorothy sailed into port on the Carpathia, which likely caused her a certain level of discomfort and helped her tap into the way too recent feelings associated with her experience. How the hell she managed to make this movie without completely losing her grip on her sanity is a testament to either her determination, her resilience, or her desire to please Brulator. Regardless, pretty damn gutsy. The production was not without its bad press either. When word got out that Eclair Studios were making a film based on the sinking, both the moving picture world and the Dramatic Mirror objected, with a column in the New York Dramatic Mirror stating, "The bare idea of undertaking to reproduce in a studio, no matter how well equipped, or by reenacted sea scenes, an event of the appalling character of the Titanic disaster with its 1,600 victims is revolting, especially at this time when the horrors of the event are so fresh in mind, and that a young woman who came so lately with her good mother safely through the distressing scenes can now bring herself to commercialize her good fortune by the grace of God is past understanding. The announcement by an independent company of good repute that it would produce a film based on the sea horror and feature an actress fortunate enough to come out of the ship alive can occasion only apprehension of the gravest character." The film was released in America on May 16, 1912, a month and 1 day after the ship sank and the day before Dorothy's 23rd birthday. As mentioned, most films from this era would usually take closer to 2 months from production to screening, so to have this movie released in half that time is a true testament to the abilities of those who worked to create it. It was a classic one-reeler and likely ran between 12 to 15 minutes. Film prints supplied to theaters were accompanied by photographic stills from the film and a set of 6 color and gold posters. The film also received a European release throughout the month of July. Was die Titanic s'élève was released in Berlin on the 6th, La Survivante du Titanic in France on the 19th, and A Survivor of the Titanic was released to British audiences on the 25th of July, with the physical length of the British version of the film being reduced from 1,000 to 660 foot. While the film mostly garnered praise playing to packed theaters across America and indeed the world, it wasn't without its detractors and critics. Many people felt the film was in poor taste given how quickly it capitalized on the tragedy and indeed its exploitation of Dorothy's traumatic experience. A letter written by an anonymous source that was printed in the New York Times in June of 1912 read, "I am writing to you to protest against the moving pictures now being shown depicting the terrible Titanic disaster. I am sure many will agree with me that it will be many, many years before the calamity will be forgotten, and I should think it would have been far wiser for the censor to condemn this film, which at its best can be only manufactured." I'm resisting the urge to overanalyze this letter and what exactly it can tell us about its author. All I will say is that A, here we are over a century later and still talking about the Titanic, 2. I'm glad Saved from the Titanic was made before the Hays Code was introduced and ruined everyone's fun. And C. Is the author somehow implying that only real footage should have been shown? That last line, which at its best can be only manufactured. Was she, and I say she because this really sounds like the 1912 version of a modern-day Karen, expecting that a film based on a true story should only use real footage?
Maybe you think we should get real kings to play the kings? Or real ancient Romans play the ancient Romans?
That's not quite the same.
Or real witches to play the witches?
I get what you're trying to...
A real St. George for St. George and the Dragon. And a real dragon. Real armies for the battles. Real fairies for the enchanted woods. Theseus and the Minotaur. Where are we going to find a Minotaur?
Yes! All right, Bottom, I get it!
Despite this criticism, Saved from the Titanic was a hit with audiences who were desperate to consume any Titanic-related media they can get their hands or eyeballs on. The periodical Moving Picture World, which had lambasted the film during its production, found itself eating crow and publishing a stellar review. Miss Dorothy Gibson, one of the survivors of the Great Disaster, has performed a unique piece of acting in the sensational new film play of the Eclair Company. A surprising and artistically perfect reel has resulted. They also praised the film's technical aspects, saying, "The wonderful mechanical and lighting effects, realistic scenes, perfect reproduction of the true history of the fateful trip, magnificently acted. A heart-stirring tale of the sea's greatest tragedy depicted by an eyewitness." However, all good things must come to an end, and after Saved from the Titanic ran its course, the film joined its contemporaries in storage at the Eclair Studios warehouse out at Fort Lee. Unfortunately for Titanic and film historians alike, early film stock was incredibly unstable and had a tendency to randomly, spontaneously combust, especially when stored with other equally unstable film stock. And so, on the 20th of March 1914, the storage warehouse at Fort Lee burned to the ground, taking with it thousands of stored films and destroying much of Eclair Studios' equipment. Not only did this fire destroy all known copies of Saved from the Titanic, but it also completely wiped out every copy of every film Dorothy had ever made for Eclair Studios. Saved from the Titanic was Dorothy's last film. In her later life, Dorothy said that while she enjoyed her time in film, it was just something she fell into and wasn't something she had any ambition toward. Some people have all the luck. Dorothy's ambitions were, she willingly admitted, old-fashioned and centered around being a wife and a mother. Her affair with Brulator was exposed to the world in 1913 when Dorothy was taken to court after she had lost control of her car while driving down to Long Island one day and hit Julia Smith and her husband. Julia survived with serious injuries, but her husband sadly died. While Dorothy managed to avoid any criminal charges for the incident, Julia Smith sued Brulator as the owner of the car for damages. I realize in the 21st century this might sound a bit weird. How on earth did Dorothy manage to get away with injuring and indeed killing a pedestrian without any kind of criminal charges, probation, or jail? Let me just remind you that this was in 1913. Cars were still relatively new inventions, and so laws regarding driving, injuring persons, and responsibility had yet to be written and codified. With the affair revealed during the trial, Brulator, already living separately from his wife, was sued by her for a divorce, which was granted in 1915. Dorothy and Brulator married in 1917 and lived happily together for about 2 years, until their marriage was legally dissolved as an invalid contract. To escape the gossip and as an attempt to start over after the massive blow done to her reputation, Dorothy moved to Paris, where she lived an interesting life until she died of a heart attack on the 17th of February 1946 at the age of 56 and was laid to rest in the Saint-Germain-en-Laye cemetery. And that would have been her legacy, nothing but a name known by silent film historians and Titanic fans, with the only evidence of her brief time as a starlet being a collection of film stills preserved in copies of film periodicals, alongside a few film reviews published in similarly preserved copies of various newspapers, after all of her films were lost in the Eclair Studios warehouse fire back in 1914. That is, until 2001, when avid film collector David Navone was at a flea market in California and purchased a sea chest full of old one-reelers. Within that collection, he found what is, to date, the only known surviving copy of a Dorothy Gibson film, The Lucky Hold-Up, which was initially released on the 11th of April 1912 while Dorothy was aboard the Titanic and sailing into history. David sought the restorative assistance of the American Film Institute, and the film has now been preserved within the Library of Congress. But you don't have to travel all the way to Washington, D.C., good old USA to see it. It's available right here on YouTube for free. Though I do feel obliged to advise anyone who wants to watch this to be aware that only 8 minutes of the film was found, which wasn't in the best condition to begin with, and no amount of restoration could completely reverse the damage done to the film stock. So there are a few scenes where it's difficult to make anything out. So check your attics, and your family's attics, and that of your neighbors and friends. Have a contest and see which of you are able to search the most attics without getting caught by random homeowners. Tell them you're doing them a favor by saving their home from randomly exploding, and hey, you might just get lucky and find a copy of Saved from the Titanic waiting for rediscovery. And don't mention my name if you get caught. For whosoever manages to find a copy of Saved from the Titanic that is salvageable, that person shall be crowned the monarch of Titanic cinema. And if you don't find a copy of Saved from the Titanic, maybe you'll find a copy of Lon Chaney's London After Midnight, which would be like 90% as good. Thanks for watching. This was a ton of fun to work on, mixing my two loves of film and Titanic together. Next video, I'll be taking a look at the first German silent film in which the Titanic features, In Nacht und Eis, der Untergang der Titanic. So until next time, safe sea travel and pleasant journeys, my friends.